I completely understand that the title of this video is very similar to the one where I laugh at funny comments that people post on my videos. However, today's video doesn't really have anything to do with comments. It's more an educational video on how to read a particular card that has caused a ton of confusion. And I do want to mention that I've talked about this sort of reading problem-solving card text thing in another video where it was titled Yu-Gi-Oh cards are difficult to read or something along those lines. I got a lot of awesome feedback on that, but people really just wanted more, and I really do try to figure out ways to fit in these ruling videos among my normal discussion videos. It's difficult though, because many times the rulings that I'm talking about can just be figured out by just reading the rule book. However, there's one card in particular that once you understand this card, you hopefully can understand a problem-solving card text as a whole just a lot better. And I want to say that the reason that this came up is actually a tweet that I did a couple days ago where I basically was just asking people, I said, cards that people who can't read problem-solving card text discover and wonder why nobody is playing them, go. And I posted this picture of this fish, Silent Wobby, I think it's pronounced. And I was kind of hoping that other people would comment cards that people misread a lot of the times. But what I actually found is that a lot of people were still really confused about how this card worked. So I thought I would just make a video explaining what this card does and how we know what it does, because there's one part in particular that people are very confused about. So anyway, let's read this card. It's a level 4 fish monster, water, 1000 attack, 2000 defense. It was released quite a while ago in premium gold. I think the very first premium gold, not the second one. And it says, during your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field, period. When summoned this way, draw one card, and if you do, your opponent gains 2000 life points. You can only use this effect of Silent Wobby once per turn. The hand size limit of this card's controller becomes 3. Now there's a lot to unpack there. I know there's several effects that we're talking about, but the big thing that catches a lot of people off guard, maybe even some of you that are listening and watching this video, is that people seem to not understand who draws the card. Well, in fact, your opponent is the one that draws the card, not you, and that's something that a lot of people are confused about. So let's talk about, how do we know that your opponent draws the card and you gain the life points and not the other way around? The first thing that you have to understand about Yu-Gi-Oh cards when you're looking at something like Silent Wobby, if you're confused, is you have to understand that cards' effects are always read from the perspective of whoever controls the card at that current moment, and also card effects, when they're segmented, when a card has multiple card effects, all the individual effects are kept within one sentence. So when you finish one sentence, the next sentence is going to be usually a completely different effect, even if they're very linked in the case of Silent Wobby, which is very similar to a card like if we think of Altergeist Multifaker, where both those effects actually are technically separate, even though they very often go hand in hand. So when we take that knowledge and read this card, hopefully this opens things up, because this says during your main phase, and then we have a colon there, which means that that's the activation condition. So that when you're in your main phase, when you met the activation condition, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field. And then there's a period, and I said that when I read the original text here, and I wanted to mention that specifically because that's one effect. Once you move on from there, it has another activated effect that says when summoned this way, draw one card, and if you do, your opponent gains 2000 life points. However, even though you activated that very first effect and you controlled it, when this card is summoned this way, your opponent now controls it, and because that is the start of a new sentence, your opponent is the one that's reading it. So when your opponent has Silent Wobby and they look at the card and they say, when summoned this way, draw one card, so they draw one card, and if you do, which they probably did, your opponent gains 2000 life points, and in that case, because they control the card, you are now the opponent that Silent Wobby is referring to. And then it has the once per turn effect, which isn't that big a deal. And then lastly, the hand size limit of this card's controller becomes 3. I do want to quickly mention that a lot of people seem to not understand that, One of the things that you have to remember with hand size limits in Yu-Gi-Oh, and this is different from a couple other card games, I think of Hearthstone, where when you have 10 cards in your hand, which is a limit, if you draw extra cards, they're burned, they kind of just go away forever. In Yu-Gi-Oh, it's different. The hand size limit doesn't come into play until the very end of the turn, which means that even though this card technically does make your opponent's hand size limit 3, they have their entire turn to get down to 3 cards. So they have 7 cards and you sum this to their side of the field, they don't have to discard 4 cards or anything, they just have to make sure they use enough of them so that when their end phase rolls around, they don't have to discard to get down to 3. But this is a card that I don't think actually is that confusing, and yet it's one of those cards that is written in a way that people who don't understand problem-solving card text really get confused. And I understand that this is a card that has confused like thousands of people. This is one of the most sort of, it's the card that I go to. I mean, that's why I made the tweet in the first place. It's a card that I go to where people that don't really know how to read cards yet, which is perfectly fine, everyone's at different levels, where people discover this card and say, holy crap, why is no one playing this? This is basically just Upstart Goblin, but your opponent gets 2,000 life points. Why are more people not using this in their decks? I better use it in my deck. And then they take it to locals and their opponent goes, okay, I draw a card for free, and then they learn the hard way. So I thought it'd be good to talk about in a video, why this card doesn't work that way. Hopefully this was helpful. I did want to talk about a couple other cards that I feel people misread and we can kind of learn about them. Maybe not so much to the extent of Silent Wobby, but it is worth mentioning that there are some other cards that I've seen frequently come up in discussions where people maybe misread 1 or 2 things. The first card that I want to mention a lot of people have trouble reading is actually one that pretty much has the literal same effect as Silent Wobby, albeit it does actually tribute an opponent's card, and that is Santa Claus. This card came out in Premium Gold 2, which means it came right after Silent Wobby, and it has the same sort of effect except it tributes a card. So it says you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field in defense position by tributing 1 monster they control, period. If summoned this way during the end phase of this turn, you can draw 1 card. Now it is worth mentioning that with Santa Claus, you do have the chance to get rid of it before they get to the end phase and draw a card, which makes it slightly better than Silent Wobby, but it's not really that much better if we think of, does that really matter in the long term? Not really. You probably should just play a Kaiju. Lastly, I wanted to talk about a card that I feel I see pop up in discussions every like 6 months from people that miss the previous round of discussions, and that is Penalty Game. Now this is a trap card from Flaming Eternity. Luckily, it did get reprinted in a Legendary collection, so it does have problem-solving card text, so we can read this card with a 2018 sort of a mindset. Anyway, this is a trap card that says, when your opponent has 4 cards in their hand, activate 1 of these effects. Either your opponent cannot draw during the next draw phase, which is basically Time Seal, which is a banned card, or your opponent cannot activate spell and trap cards this turn. Like, holy crap, that is literally a Cold Wave or a Time Seal, and all it requires your opponent to have is 4 cards in hand. That seems insane. Why isn't everyone playing this card? It seems like Trap Dust Shoot even. There's something about this card that a lot of people don't realize, and don't feel dumb if you don't. Like, that's not what I'm trying to do in this video. I'm not trying to mock anyone for not knowing how to read these cards, because sometimes you need to just read them with a Yu-Gi-Oh mindset, especially as someone that played Pokemon for a couple months. I realized that sometimes their rulings were a little different in this case. So where am I talking about with Penalty Game here? What I'm talking about is that your opponent has to have exactly 4 cards, not at least 4 cards. So if your opponent has 5 or 6 cards, which is very common, this card can't be activated. Your opponent has to have exactly 4 cards. And I know some of you are going to type, well, that's stupid. It doesn't say exactly. Yes, that is true, and I understand where you're coming from. However, when Yu-Gi-Oh cards mention up to or at least, they put those words in there. If you look at a card like Twin Twisters, it says destroy up to 2 spell and trap cards. It doesn't say destroy 2. If it said destroy 2, you would have to destroy 2 cards. Now, this isn't the same in every single card game, but in Yu-Gi-Oh, if something does not say at least, or if it doesn't say up to that number, it requires you to exactly have that number. So in the case of Penalty Game, the reason the card isn't being played right now is because your opponent has to have exactly 4 cards in their hand. And I know it could say exactly, but they don't really need to put that because it doesn't say up to. It doesn't say at least 4 cards in their hand. It just says 4, so your opponent has to have 4, no more, no less. Anyway, though, that is pretty much going to wrap up today's video. If there's any other questions you guys have about these cards or similar cards, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. I really do enjoy doing these sort of ruling discussion videos. I know mistiming is like the big one that everyone asks for, and maybe I'll do a video on that. That's like kind of, I don't know, I'm probably going to use like Dupe Frog as an example, because that's one of the best examples of a card that would be way more powerful if it didn't miss timing. But yeah, just let me know what kind of ruling videos you guys want me to talk about. Thank you so much for watching, though. I will see you later. Goodbye.